welcome back to the Lowdown. My name's Dax Dixon. Lindsay, it's good to see you again. How are we doing today?
Good, doing good.
Good. So I think the topic of today is just sharing finances with a spouse. And so we are both married. We have both walked through the process of getting married. Can I ask how old were you when you were married?
I'm one of the typical millennials that got married on the slightly older side, although not as old as you. I was I was 30 when I got married. 30, no, 31. I was 31.
Yeah, so I was 36. And so I think this is very common in the millennial generation. You and I had been working for a number of years, paying our own bills, contributing to our own 401ks, managing kind of day to day lifestyle expenses, things like that for a long time before we got married. And so I know after marriage, there's this common household expenses then, or maybe when you moved in together, if you did that. So I guess my question is to you, like, how was that for you going through that transition? And do you mind just talking a little bit about, I know there's a spectrum of management styles that couples kind of fall into, different routines, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting to compare and contrast because even though we got married in our 30s, my husband and I were together for 8 years before that. So, and we had lived together, we were very serious, we had moved together. And so we had shared household expenses for some time. I think we moved in together after 2 years of dating. So we had kind of had a system that was really working for us and jiving. So, but I had my full-time role, he had his full-time job, and we were really happy. So we kept things pretty separate for the first couple of years. And then we realized, well, we it might be easier if we have a joint bucket. And so we kind of talked it out and figured out what's the percentage that we each spend already on joint expenses like housing or vacations, things like that, and let's see what percentage that makes up of each of our salaries, and let's just put that in together, figuring as our salaries continued to grow and we grew on our careers, we would continue to see the net benefit of that. Our joint account would continue to grow. So we worked on that for a while, and then once we got closer to marriage and wedding time, we increased that a little bit. Once we got a dog, we increased it a little bit more. When we got a house, increased it quite a bit more. And same thing with kids, we increased it about a lot more. So now, we started off with like 19% of our salaries going into the joint pot together. Now we're at about 43%. We might be closer to 47. Actually, I think we're at
Wow,
47.
that sounds super precise. It's not like 50, it's like 47.92%. So it
Yeah,
seems like you track this fairly closely.
well, the reason that we have it like that is because when I feel flush, right, and I feel like my salary's doing pretty good, he makes more than I do. So he's a little bit more comfortable than I am. I'll tell him, hey, let's knock it up a percent. So, I went from
Mhm.
46 to 47%. That's just enough to like bolster our vacation fund or our kids' education funds, our household fund a little bit more, because I want to make sure that I'm taking care of my single bills are taken care of after our joint bills are already taken care of, but the together fun stuff is kind of our third priority. And so once I
Yeah.
have some wiggle room, that's where I'm kind of bumping it up by a percent, right, or two. I mean, I did the same thing with my 401k, right? You start off contributing 3% and then 4%, 5%
Mhm.
until all of a sudden you're contributing the max.
The
Why?
old
So
boiled frog, right?
yeah,
So
Dax, how do you handle this with your wife?
yeah, I think it's a good question because I think this exists on a spectrum. It sounds like you and Tom have figured out a way. We personally, she handles some bills, I handle some bills. So we do not have
Mm,
right now a combined joint account. And
mm,
so, well, we do have one, and we just don't use it. We've been intending to sit down and use it, but being someone who works in finance, she's not. And so it's that conversation's not as smooth as it could be in some other cases, I guess. But I guess she gets anxiety when we talk about. But
mm.
yeah, for the most part, she has her set of bills, I have mine. It mostly aligns with, our comparative income. So it's not like we're paying 50-50 down the middle. I think that I've seen issues pop up in couples that we've talked to where, there is a big income level and they're trying to pay things 50-50. You're going to get into a lot of like the lifestyles of the two will be different because it's impossible to maintain an equal
Well,
lifestyle if you're paying more in bills as a
that's how
percentage.
I mean, that's how my husband and I would be. We would have a much lower lifestyle if we were only paying 50-50, because I would be maxing out at a certain amount and my husband's income's higher than mine. So it would be, yeah, we'd be having a much lower lifestyle jointly. So this way it
Right.
allows us to kind of, yeah. So I agree with you. We're doing the similar, it sounds like our percentage thing, you're doing it, but just not to the same exact dollar amount or
Yeah,
exact.
well, not in a like it's more like independently than coming into a joint account. And because of that, I guess we're both managing bills on a month to month basis. So, and I've seen a spectrum of that, and I'm sure you have too, where maybe one spouse manages, I think I told you previously, we had a certain clients that were like, I'm going to take care of the household bills. You take care of all the bills related to our children. Happened
Mm-hmm.
to work out that was around the same thing or around, pro rata from their income. But I think there's a spectrum there as far as like who's responsible for doing what in the household finances.
Well, I mean, it
I
could
know.
be based on, like you were saying, based on the bills that are coming in. Or I know, I think in our some of our pre-conversations, we talked about the way my parents used to do finances. They both had pretty equivalent roles, equivalent jobs. They made about the same amount, but they just dividing up the responsibilities. My dad would pay the taxes every year, and not pay the taxes. He would they joined their finances, but my dad would do the work to prepare their taxes and file their taxes every year. And I remember the table in the basement that was full of stacks of paper for their paper, tax forms and
Did he
everything.
have the green visor and the rolled up sleeves?
I mean, basically. I mean, the TV was
Yeah.
on, so,
Yeah.
But then I remember monthly, my mom would also would be on the kitchen table, paying bills with little stacks, but they each had their own, responsibilities that they divvied up, even though they shared the joint finances part of
Yep.
it. So I think finding what works for you is what matters. And obviously there's a whole generational thing we can talk about too.
Yeah, I think most couples do divide and conquer when
Hmm.
it comes to household finances. You know, probably you and I handle a lot more of the whether it's a short term financial, how do we calculate our necessary savings rates? And then how do you build a system to execute against that, as well as kind of the long term saving and investing piece of it. I handle probably 70-80% of that in my household. I'm not
Hmm.
sure. I'm sure that's the same case as you, if not up to
Yeah.
100%.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I think that that's typical for somebody in our industry, but I think that's also typical in most marriages, like when you have or relationships, partnerships, when you have one person that's more.
Long-term focused, right? Versus short.
Yeah, or even someone who has an education background or an interest in financial services, they typically will gravitate towards being the CFO of the household, so to speak,
Mhm.
right?
It's a lot different though, being the millennial, or I mean, I'm curious to see how Gen Z also is,
Yeah,
going to be working their finances as a couple. But when you look back at our grandparents, and even I mentioned my parents joined everything, but our grandparents' age, it was typically the husband who brought home the paycheck, and they were responsible for that long term, making sure that the income came in and how to spend on long term things like buying the house. But it was the wife's decision, and it was her planning for the household spending, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I guess the question that gets at is like, what if someone is driving the day to day expenses of their household or management of those expenses, and if that same person's also managing the budget, managing the savings, and potentially managing the investments, things can go off track pretty quickly in that case, right? Because typically that person may have different goals than their significant other may have. And so how do you get things back on track if if you're not on the same page with how money should be spent in the household?
Well, that's a very easy answer, which is communication in your
Yeah.
relationship, right? I'm being facetious because that's obviously the biggest problem or the biggest trouble in relationships is obviously how to communicate in the right way about whatever it is that's the current issue.
Yeah.
Finance is commonly the issue, but making sure when you have an idea of what your and your partner's goals are, they might not be entirely aligned, but they should be similar. And worst case, you should at least be aware of them and working
Yeah.
together towards them.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Just make sure that like you can't prioritize everything. Children's educations, vacations, second home, all of that. You can't have it all unless you're extremely wealthy. But and that's not the case for most people. But I think that it starts with communication. Make sure that the big things are in place. Make sure that you're taking care of your future and your day to day expenses first, and then kind of the luxury items in life come third in my mind. Whether that's home upgrades, going out to eat more, or going on vacation more, whatever it may be.
And it's all about
Um,
compromise too, right? What's important
yeah,
to your husband might be something that is less important to me, but vice versa. So we're gonna arrange to talk about what's his highest priority, what's my highest priority. How can we make them both work to some extent with that compromise?
right. And again, I think all this exists on a spectrum. There's no one right answer, but you have to make sure that everybody's on the same page with whatever answer you get to. The last thing that I wanted to mention was just everybody needs a pot of just guilt-free money. Like, as
Yeah,
long as it's okay, otherwise, like, you just have a pot. Like, if I'm a golfer. If I have a pot of money to go play golf every month, then that should be okay. If it fits into our the rest of our life, obviously. But and same thing with her. If she wants to spend money traveling with her friends down to Wilmington or whatever, then that's her business. I think everybody needs some
absolutely.
pot of money that's like no questions asked. You get to use it how you want.
Yeah, because I mean, every one of us is an adult and has our own passions and desires that are and should be separate from your relationship. And if that's
Yeah,
hanging out with friends or seeing your family or traveling or shoes, I mean, it could be anything. But you're
yeah,
right, it's
yeah,
spending. I mean, that's something that it's interesting. You allow for that a bit on the back end because you're each taking care of bills first. Whereas we are taking care of that on the front end by saying we get everything except that 47%,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So
So interesting.
so as long as that normalizes on the other side and you're comfortable with however that comes out, I think that's exactly right. Because then your husband might bring in something or my wife, and I might be like into the house. I'm like, who would ever spend money, right? But then you just take that mindset. That's hers. That's
Yeah.
her decision or his decision or their decision or whatever. So all right. Well, I think that's our time for today, Lindsay. Any parting thoughts or
No, great. I mean, great questions. I think that my main parting thought is that there's no wrong answer here other than one that's just not working.
yeah.
As long as you're finding something that's working for you as a couple and allowing you both to reach for your goals and prioritize what is most important to each of you, you're happy, that's what matters. You're gonna get there. There's no wrong way to do it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lindsay. I guess till next time.